Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. It's our honor, our privilege to engage with our good friend, Amir Tibon, this morning. For those of you who may not have had the privilege of learning with him, getting his insights, Amir writes for Haaretz, he writes for Walla News, he's presently working on a book, and he has been a great friend to our congregation. When Amir would meet with us, he was always sitting outside. It looked like paradise. And we would always be amazed that he would tell us proudly that he was just a short distance from the Gaza border. And I always imagined, I think as probably many did, that what a privilege to live in such a place. But as we all know, on October 7th, all of that changed. And Nahal Oz, the place that Amir and his family made their home, was one of the first places to be overrun by Hamas. And by now, I imagine that we've all heard the story of how Amir's father, retired General Noam Tibon, got the call from his son and immediately jumped into action. And in the end, when the IDF was virtually absent, Amir's parents found a way to get down to that area, saving people along the way, and managed to free Amir and his wife and children from that safe room. So Amir, welcome. Tell us, how's everyone doing? And a little bit about where you're living.
Hi, Rabbi, and hello to all of my friends at Anshe Emet. And it's exciting to be speaking with you again. I think in our previous meetings or when I taught, courses about Israel to the community, the circumstances were better. And, Rabbi, when you talked about me joining the Zoom from my front porch in Nahal Oz, I felt that because it's these kinds of small memories of home that are the most difficult to deal with right now. The disaster that our community went through, and I'll talk about that in a second, is so large that it's difficult to comprehend sometimes. And it's these smaller memories of an afternoon outside, surrounded by the lawns and the flowers that actually make us feel home strong, more strongly than anything else. But right now, since the early morning hours of October 8th, our entire community, Kibbutz Nahal Oz, approximately 450 people before the disaster struck us, has been evacuated to Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek. Mishmar HaEmek is a kibbutz in north central Israel, you can say. It's close to Haifa. And this kibbutz decided to host us already on October 7, on that dark Saturday, when the news began to stream out of southern Israel of the Hamas attack. Mishmar Emek began to prepare for hosting our community. Now, there's a bit of a history here. For several years now, every time there was some kind of a confrontation, escalation, crisis on the Gaza border, Mishmar Emek would open its doors to, I don't know what's the word to use, refugees, evacuees from the Gaza border area, including from Nahal Oz. They have a boarding school on the premises of the kibbutz here, and what they would do, every time some escalation would start, they would send the teenagers back to their homes and welcome families from the Gaza border area. Usually it would be for a week, maybe 10 days. That's how long these rounds of escalation would usually last, and by then everybody would go back home. This time, they had to do something completely different. They basically passed a decision within their kibbutz to host us, the Nahal Oz community, for an entire year.
How many
because
people
of
is
the
that?
So Nahal Oz on the morning of October 7 was 450 people. We lost 15 members of our community on that day. We have 7 people who were kidnapped. And 5 of them have been released since then, but 2 are still in the hands of the enemy in Gaza. Not everybody came here, not the entire community. Several families went to a kibbutz in southern Israel near Beersheba, Kibbutz Kramim, that is also hosting families. Several people chose to detach themselves a bit from the community and go to other places in other parts of the country. But the vast majority, I would say more than 300 people for sure, came here. Now, Mishmar HaEmek on its own is a community of about, I would say, 1,200 people. It's a pretty large kibbutz. But think about it, Rabbi. You know, this is like a family of 4, basically adding another person for an entire year into their house. This is what they did now. You know, think that they're 1,200 and they took more than 300 people into their community. Nahal Oz arrived here on the early morning hours of October 8th. On October 9, Mishmar HaEmek opened a kindergarten and a daycare for our children. They took other buildings in the community, prepared them during the day, transformed their usage, and by October 9, there was a kindergarten for our children. So it's truly incredible. I will say the living conditions are not easy. Each family got a small room, basically, you know, like a little studio. You can compare it to that. Um, we're all, you know, sleeping in the same rooms with our children right now on mattresses on the floor. No, you know, cooking or refrigeration or, you know, washer, dryer. All of those things don't exist in the rooms. We have to do it communally, a bit like the kibbutz of the 1950s, if you will. And it's a challenging time. I'm joining you now from a really interesting place, actually. It's the archive of Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek. I'll show it just a second. You can see there's all these interesting historical kibbutz artifacts. And this has become my office. I sit here every day. I'm currently writing a book in English about the history of Kibbutz Nahal Oz, including the October 7 events. And Mishmar HaEmek offered me a table here at the archive to sit and write the book. And it's really an interesting place to do it. So that's where we are right now, Rabbi, to your question.
And the story that you're telling, and as impressive as it is, and for the residents of Mishmar HaEmek, that story can be told throughout Israel,
Yes.
where people
Yes.
open their homes, institutions are open. And one of the dramatic parts of the story of Israel on October 7th and post October 7th is the manner in which the people of Israel have mobilized themselves as civilians. Organizations have totally regeared themselves to care for each other. And that's a remarkable piece. Well, please give your wife and your children our best and a happy Yom Haledet Sameach to one of your daughters from yesterday.
Yes.
So, Amir, it's been 114 days since October 7th. More than 100 hostages are still being held. We don't know how many are alive. More than well over 500 IDF soldiers have died, 21 in one building on Monday of this past week. More than 200,000 Israelis have been displaced, you amongst them, you and your family. Thousands of Palestinian civilians have died in Gaza. People say that nearly 2 million are displaced in Gaza.
Yeah.
So the question that one can ask at a moment like this is, when Israel set out with 2 goals, one was to crush Hamas, the second was to free the hostages. How do you gauge the success of the war at this point in time?
I think we are seeing on the one hand the military doing excellent work in Gaza and really doing great damage to Hamas's capabilities, weakening Hamas to a point that we had never done before and probably should have done many years ago, but for various reasons we didn't. And you see that the area of Gaza City, the military took over completely. Now they're taking over Khan Yunis, which is the second largest city in the Gaza Strip. You see that the ability of Hamas to launch long-range rockets and missiles at Israel has almost completely evaporated. I think they haven't fired at the area of, beyond, let's say, Ashkelon for several weeks now. There are no longer sirens in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. They are still able to fire sporadically to the Gaza border area. Every day there's a siren in Nahal Oz at some point. Every day there's a siren in Sderot at some point, and we should not accept that. We should not accept the idea that the Gaza border area is fair game. But even that, the intensity of Hamas's firepower is much less impressive than it was a few weeks ago. And so I think that every Israeli soldier, whether a regular soldier or a reservist who took part in this effort, can be proud of this result. At the same time, on the issue of the refugees, I think the results are much more dismal, and we have to be honest about it. I think the early military pressure in November, when the IDF first entered Gaza, combined with a great diplomatic effort led by President Biden, and a lot of pressure on Qatar and Egypt, and also on the Israeli government to all find a place where they can compromise, led to a very good deal in which more than 100 hostages, mostly women and children, were released. And for me, that meant the world, Rabbi, because we got back 5 of the hostages who were kidnapped in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, including, by the way, 2 American citizens from Illinois, Judith and Natalie Raanan, the daughter and granddaughter of Tammy from Evanston, Illinois, indeed. Yes, the daughter and granddaughter of Tammy, a wonderful woman, a friend of ours, even though there's a few decades separating us, but really a friend of ours in the kibbutz. And so I really applaud President Biden for that. And I thought that agreement was very important. And I think it was a combination of military pressure and diplomatic initiative that allowed it to happen. But now we've been almost 2 months almost a month and a half into the continuation of the fighting. And we badly need another deal like that because the hostages are dying in there. They're dying in there. They're not getting enough food. Some of them are being tortured, and they're not getting the medicines that they need. And we badly need some kind of a deal, even if it means there will be a halt, a pause to the fighting. I will support such a deal, knowing that it will prolong the period of time I spend away from home, knowing that it will prolong the amount of time that will be needed for the military to finish the job and make it safe for my family to return to Nahal Oz. Still bringing back our people alive is, to me, the most important goal right now. And we still have 2 friends and neighbors from our kibbutz in the hands of Hamas, Omri Miran and Tzachi Idan. Both of them are fathers of young children, and we need them back home. And so I think that the military has had a lot of great achievements on the tactical level. And I think on the strategic level, now is the right moment to take a deal, and it will be a painful deal. It will not be an easy deal. We will have to release probably thousands of prisoners, many of them terrorists from our own prisons. But I think that deserting our people in the hands of the enemy is an unacceptable choice.
I think it's important for us just to underscore that the American system and the Israeli system are very different. In the United States, the president is understood as the commander-in-chief. So the army is sort of under the aegis on some level of the president. Yep. Whereas in Israel, it's much more separate. Can you just talk about that for a second? Because, you hear in the news, there's a focus on the Netanyahu government and all the rest. And the IDF functions in many ways independent of that. Is that not correct?
I wouldn't say completely independent, but I think you're absolutely right in highlighting the fact that in Israel, the prime minister is not the chief commander of the military. In Israel, the chief commander of the military is the security cabinet. Okay, the prime minister in Israel, for many, many reasons, does not have the same level of influence as your president. We have a very different system with pros and cons. For example, you have term limits. In our system, the prime ministers are weaker to begin with, but as Benjamin Netanyahu has shown us, they can hold office forever. Now, this war right now is a bit different from previous wars in the sense that it's not the regular security cabinet that is running the war and commanding the military. There is a separate cabinet that was formed specifically for the purpose of running the war. And it was formed 4 days or 5 days into the war when Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, two former retired generals and the leaders of a centrist party, decided to join an emergency government with Netanyahu. And their one condition for joining the emergency government was to form a war cabinet separate from the regular security cabinet that will have the final say on all military affairs and will not include the right-wing fanatics in the Netanyahu coalition, people like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. So the real forum that is currently making the decisions is a much smaller cabinet that includes Netanyahu, Gantz, Eisenkot, the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and Ron Dermer, who's a close advisor to Netanyahu. This is the forum that's really calling the shots, and they, at the end of the day, are the ones directing the IDF. And so every decision there must pass with at least a 3-2 majority. That's the range that we're looking at.
So thank you for that. Going back to your openness, which I think is probably reflective of the Israeli populace, of putting a priority on the release of the hostages, there was a report from the New York Times yesterday that a deal is about to be announced for a staged release of hostages that may create a cease in hostilities for 2 months. First of all, how much validity do you give to this? Does this indicate to you that Israel is putting more emphasis on the goal of freeing the hostages and destroying Hamas? Is Israel bowing to the demands of the Americans as much as Prime Minister Netanyahu tries to show otherwise? Or has Israel decided that the real threat isn't from Hezbollah and they need to refocus? So I asked you a lot of questions at once, but if you could give us a framework of how you would approach this news.
So first of all, I think there are reports about a deal that is emerging in which Israel will hold its fire for 2 months and Hamas will do the same. And then all the hostages alive, and unfortunately those who have died in captivity, will also be returned to Israel, and Israel will release thousands of Palestinian prisoners. I think for everyone involved, this is the best deal they're going to get. Israel can probably put more pressure on Hamas and then shorten the amount of time of the ceasefire, but what would then happen is that we will get less living hostages. It's very easy to say we need to get back our hostages, but if you add one more word to it, we need to get back our hostages alive, you understand the complexity. Because you can put more pressure for a month now, probably crack the resistance in Khan Yunis, begin entering Rafah, which is the 3rd largest city in Gaza and located directly on the border with Egypt, and maybe by then Hamas will agree to a ceasefire of only 2 weeks. But how many of the 100 plus hostages will still be alive at that? So this is what we have to play with here. And it's important to understand, Rabbi, Israel doesn't have good options in this war. We started this war at such a deficit that we are only choosing between bad options right now. Continuing to pressure Hamas and delaying a hostage deal is a bad option. Doing a deal tomorrow and accepting all of Hamas's demands is also a bad option. Trying to navigate between the two, increase the military pressure, but agree to some kind of a deal that will maybe not be very popular among the supporters of the Netanyahu government is probably the best option we have. And that's how I think it will eventually happen. I think we're looking at some kind of a deal that will give us back as many living hostages as we can get, will give Hamas what it wants, which is prisoners and a longer ceasefire, and the IDF will have to use that period to regroup and look at the strategy of the war so far, what worked well, what didn't work well, and of course, always keep an eye on the northern front. That is definitely important to remember. We should not sleep for 1 second on what's happening up north, and giving our soldiers some rest time and some training time for the scenario of a second front opening with Hezbollah is definitely an important thing to take into consideration as well.
So no one should really come to the idea that this war is going to end anytime soon. Israel's already announced that it intends to create more of a buffer with Hezbollah. That would mean that Hezbollah is going to have to uproot its illegal outposts, which I'm sure they're not going to do willingly. So this will continue on, which means that people who are living in border communities will continue to be under threat.
I'll tell you something, Rabbi. When my family, was in the safe room on October 7th for more than 10 hours, and terrorists were firing into our home, into our living room, and we heard for the entire day shouting in Arabic outside our window, and just a very, very dangerous situation. What I thought to myself was that we made a conscious decision to live on the border and to take certain risks that other Israelis are not willing to take. We always knew living in Nahal Oz, for example, that we were not protected by Iron Dome. Iron Dome protects most of the state of Israel, and it's an amazing invention. It doesn't protect the communities directly on the border because it doesn't have enough time to calculate the route of a mortar that's launched from Gaza toward my home in Nahal Oz. We always knew that a sniper from Gaza could get us while we were driving in the car, taking the kids to swimming class in a neighboring community. These were things that we were aware of. We even knew that potentially a Hamas cell of 5 men could somehow infiltrate the border and enter our community, and there will be a gunfight outside our window. But we never imagined a situation where 150 Hamas terrorists will enter our community, and it will take the military 7.5 hours to arrive. This is something we did not imagine. So when we talk about risks and threats to the border communities, everybody has a different level of threat that they will now consider reasonable. I think nobody is expecting our borders to become Liechtenstein and Switzerland all of a sudden and have total and absolute security. I don't believe in that. I never believed in that. But we do have to ask ourselves, how can we ensure that something like October 7th never happens again, and nothing even remotely similar to it ever happens again? Not on the southern border and not on the northern border. And this will require big changes in Israel as a country and as a society that we have to begin to contend with. We're going to need a larger military. That will mean that certain sectors in Israeli society who today are exempt automatically from military service will no longer be able to enjoy that privilege. We will need different priorities inside the military. People who in the past were automatically referred to technological or intelligence units. I served in a technological intelligence unit. Tomorrow morning may be asked to do other things, other missions. We are going to have to rethink about how we divide the resources in our country between the peripheral areas close to the borders and the heart of the country. these are very big decisions that we will have to make. And without making them, we will fail this mission of providing better security and making sure that October 7 is never repeated in any of the country's borders.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that what Israelis thought was normal is no longer the case after October 6th, beginning October 7th, that this is a new normal, which is that the borders are only as secure as we allow them to be. And that means that that has to become a focus. That's a very helpful framework. So thank you for that, as much as difficult as it is, by the way, to hear it. And I'm sure it's succinct.
Again, I think October 7 has to be a watershed moment in Israel.
Yeah.
And it has to lead to some very deep changes in the country, in the society, in the military, in the economy. And we're only beginning to grasp what it means, because right now we're still busy with the day-to-day of the war. But the whole way that we manage this country will be affected by this event.
So before, on October 6th, had we had a conversation, we would have talked about, whether or not Israel was going to go into a civil war. And remarkably, the country came together in a way, in an active unity that is almost unlike anything the world has ever seen. So now 114 days have passed. How would you characterize the mood of the country now? Are we falling back into this strife, or how do you understand it?
I think the first weeks after October 7, there was a very strong sense of unity in the country, in light of the shock of that barbaric attack and just the viciousness and the cruelty of Hamas. The next weeks afterward, there was even a stronger sense of unity because of all the people who went to reserve service and fought shoulder to shoulder, right wing and left wing, religious and secular, settlers and kibbutzniks, Jews and non-Jews, right? We had Druze and Muslim soldiers and Christian soldiers who died in battle. I think in the last few weeks, that sense has begun to evaporate for various reasons. And I think we are seeing more of the political strife that we saw before October 7. It's not as strong as it was probably, but it is coming back. And in some way, it's normal because the issues that tore apart this country before October 7 have not been resolved and they've not gone away. We kind of put them on hold for a while, but they're still here. And the main question that we're facing today, Israel is at a fork in the road. Will we go back to what we had before October 7, or will we build something better out of this crisis? Will we use this opportunity to come and say, okay, we have to make big decisions in this country. Some of them are constitutional questions. We discussed that, I think, when we had opportunities to speak about the big fight over the division of power between the authorities in Israel. So some of them are social questions, enlistment in the military, religion and state. I'm putting aside for a second the question of the conflict with the Palestinians, which is by itself a huge question, but it's not only up to us, it's also up to the other side. And, we have many things to fight over even without that issue. We can try to find a way to reach consensus on these issues and resolve them in a smart and sensitive way, using this momentum, this energy of the togetherness that we saw during the war, or we can descend very quickly within a few weeks back into the old habits that we saw before. I don't know which way it will go, but I am concerned that for the current political leadership, the choice to go back to the internal fighting is a more useful way to
Right.
hold power, and to distract people from the failures of October 7th, to
Right.
distract the people
Yeah.
from, the need to investigate the flaws and the problems. And then if you have this kind of battle atmosphere again, people settle into camps and forget what happened. And so I
Right.
really, really hope we don't go there.
God willing. Well, you're no stranger to Washington and or the relationship between Jerusalem and Washington. How would you describe the relationship between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government at the present time? And I'm just going to add to this a quotation that's been kind of clinking around in my head. Henry Kissinger, who just passed away, once said that Israel doesn't actually have a foreign policy. It only has a domestic policy. So how would you characterize that? How would you respond to the accusation, the belief that Prime Minister Netanyahu is actually just is using this time to run for office? And as you were saying before, his playbook has often been about security and in a way of dividing the country. So how do you frame that? I'm going to step away for 1 second, but if you'll answer the question, I'm listening. Just have to step away
Right.
for 1 second. I'm sorry for
Sure.
that.
So I will say, I had a chance to meet President Biden when he came to Israel in October. And I want to remind everyone who's watching that President Biden was the first American president to ever visit Israel during an active war. Um, we've had a lot of friends in the White House over the years, but it's important to remember, Lyndon Johnson did not visit Israel. He was the first US president to invite an Israeli leader to meet him at his own residence in the ranch in Texas, but he did not visit. And President, well, I mean, I'm thinking there are just too many examples, but let's say, President Nixon was the first one to visit Israel, and he supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War, but he only came to visit afterward. And we can go on and on with these examples. George W. Bush was a very strong supporter of Israel, but he didn't visit the country during the years of the Second Intifada. He only came in 2007, toward the end of his term. Joe Biden flew into Israel 2 weeks after October 7, when missiles were still falling all over the country. And he invited a group of, well, not he personally, but the American embassy in Israel invited a group of Israelis who were personally impacted by October 7th to come and meet the president. And I had the honor of being one of those people. We were a group of 12 Israelis, very diverse group, by the way, people from all political leanings and religious and social backgrounds, that we were united by one thing. We were impacted very personally. We lost family members and friends and neighbors and were attacked ourselves on October 7th. And the president, after meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu and the war cabinet and President Herzog, and the families of the American citizens who are hostage in Gaza, after doing all of that, we were at the last stop in his schedule. And I was convinced we're going to get 2 minutes, a handshake, and bye-bye. But President Biden, he walked into the room and he just went from person to person in the room. He shook people's hands, and he was taller than most of them, so he kind of leaned to listen to their stories. He asked them some questions about what happened to them, about their families. He showed an amazing sympathy and empathy for everyone who was there. He was hugging people. He shed tears with them, especially those who had lost family members. Then he gave a short statement to the press, and we thought, okay, that's it. We already had 15 minutes with him. It was amazing. But as the Secret Service was beginning to kind of make hints that they're preparing for movement, President Biden raised his hand and he said, wait a second, I need to talk to these people just a few more minutes. And so we all huddled around him. He was standing, leaning on some table, and we were all huddled around him, all the Israelis. For about 10, maybe 15 minutes, he spoke to us about grief. He spoke to us about tragedy. He spoke from his own personal experience. And there was one thing he said that really stuck with me, Rabbi. He said, you guys should know that you are going to think about the people that you lost in this horrendous attack for every day now for the rest of your lives. And he said, I know, because it's been 50 years since my wife and daughter died in a car accident. I think about them every day. It's been a decade since my son died from cancer. I think about him every day. And you know, Rabbi, it's been what, I think 3.5 months or something since that meeting with President Biden. I think about the neighbors and friends that I lost on October 7th every day. He was right. So that's regarding President Biden. One of the things I wrote after that meeting was that President Biden showed a level of empathy and just gave the people of Israel a hug in his visit, in a way that we never got from our own leadership at this time of crisis. You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu, you like him or you don't like him, this is not his thing. He did not come to visit any of the affected communities after October 7th. He was afraid that people will say things he doesn't want to hear, so he just never bothered to show up. You know, you don't, it took him, I think, 3 weeks after the attack to say for the first time that many kibbutzim were hurt on October 7th, because the kibbutzim are not known as strongholds of Likud. It took him 3 weeks to even utter that word in one of his speeches. And I think politically he's now in a battle for survival. He sees that most of the Israeli public is not with him, is unhappy, wants him to step down, but he still has a parliamentary majority, and as long as he can hold to it, he will hold to it. The problem now is that his majority, and this has been the problem from day one with this government, the problem is that this majority relies on very extreme factions, on the most extreme forces in Israeli politics, you know, the Ben Gvir Smotrich faction. And that gives them a lot of influence on the policy in a way that obviously will lead to confrontations with the United States. Obviously, Smotrich and Ben Gvir are talking about things that are completely opposed to US policy, even in the most pro-Israeli administrations. Some of what they're talking about was unacceptable even for the Trump administration at the time. So this is a confrontation that I'm not optimistic about, because as long as he relies on Ben Gvir and Smotrich for survival, and he doesn't trust, by the way, Gantz and Lapid to replace them. He's afraid that if he throws out Ben Gvir and Smotrich and brings the moderates into his coalition, after a few months there will be some kind of a fight, and the moderates will throw him under the bus, and he will lose power. So he's sticking with Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Biden, as much as he has supported Israel during the war, he doesn't give free checks. Okay, he's the president of the United States. He's not the president of Israel. And I think he's been incredibly supportive, but he has his own interests here. And this leads us to a collision that both sides don't really gain anything from, but politically is where the prime minister is leading the country.
And, you know, thinking about the ICJ's decision on Friday, and how some of the members of the ruling coalition were being quoted quite regularly. By the way, as well as members of the military. So the world is watching and the world is listening. And so there's no longer just domestic politics, because there's a live mic, a hot mic somewhere. And one wonders if there'll be any effort to rein some of these people in, or at least to because it's not just what happens in Israel. And by the way, I want to say that as an American Jew, it affects us. Right? This we have a rabbinic phrase, a pitchon peh, right? You give your enemies an opening of the mouth. You know that you're giving them what they want, the fodder for their argumentation. And that creates a real tension for American Jews. And yes, as you know well, the anti-Semitism is great. But I want to lead into another question, which comes from a member of our congregation, Stu Fagan. I'm just going to read it. What is expected from American Jews who wholeheartedly support Israel in the current situation, but who are very concerned about some of the tactics adopted by the current government. The absence of a stage B plan, the treatment of an American president who's been the most supportive of Israel of any American president, right? We and our children and their children are asking, what should we do in this situation? I know you're not a prophet,
Yeah, yeah,
so but
yeah.
it's
No,
I think it's an important question because I think a
no, it's a
lot
real,
of people are thinking of
yeah.
this.
First of all, obviously I cannot put, all this issue on my own shoulders. I mean, there are many potential answers to this, and mine is not necessarily the best one, but I will
Mhm.
try. I think in the beginning of the war, the most important role that American Jews took upon themselves was to support Biden as he supported Israel. Because Biden came under a lot of fire from the far left for his support of Israel. There was an entire campaign threatening to boycott him in the election if he continued to support Israel. There were people inside the Democratic Party, not many, but also not few, who were attacking him for this. And he stood his ground. He continued to support Israel. And I think it was very important for American Jewry to stand up for Israel and to show that Biden has got a communal back for his support of Israel. And I thought that was very, very important. I think today we're in a bit of a different situation. I think President Biden right now and Prime Minister Netanyahu have different goals for where this is going. And I don't know, Rabbi, if you're aware of the news, but as we are speaking, it has come out that 3 American soldiers died last night in Jordan, attacked by some militia from Iraq. Um, and I think President Biden wants this war to enter a different stage and to be in a place where it's no longer on top of the international agenda. And the administration is very concerned of some kind of a regional flame out, um, and wants to try to minimize and contain this. And of course, I think a hostage deal and some kind of temporary ceasefire is one of the best measures to do that, because Israel will not stop the fighting without the hostages. That's just not something any of our friends can ask us to do. But if we get the hostages back, I think it's a reasonable idea. Take a break for a second, because America is also taking a hit for us right now. It's important to understand the wider context here. I think it's very important for American Jews who care about the situation right now in Israel, very, very important, to look for constructive ways to support Israel at this time. And I have some ideas of my own. And we can talk about it later, but I think, one of the biggest needs right now is to support the communities that have been affected by this war, whether it's in southern Israel or northern Israel. We have 150,000 internally displaced people in this country, which is unprecedented. We have entire communities that need to be rebuilt and strengthened, and hopefully also to grow and prosper and get to a better place 10 years today than they were on October 6th. That's a huge mission that I think American Jewry will have a key role in fulfilling. I would stay away from the political side of things right now, I have to say honestly. I think it's very murky. I think it's very unclear where it's going. And as we enter an election year in the United States, I think the worst thing would be to turn this into some kind of a litmus test for the Jewish community, because most American Jews vote first and foremost on issues that are important to them as American citizens. And I think Joe Biden has been an amazing president for Israel. I think you can also make the case that his emerging opponent, Donald Trump, also did some very good things for Israel when he was president. And turning Israel into an issue in the election, I think, will just be disastrous. So I think it's a very, very delicate and sensitive moment. And while there are politicians who may benefit from this kind of a fight over Israel in the American election. I don't think the American Jewish community will benefit from it, and I don't think Israel as a country will benefit from it. Rabbi, I think you're muted.
You have to do that once a day to make sure that, I always have to mute myself at some point. So I got that out of the way. Before we talk about rebuilding, actually, I'll come to that other question last. So after October 7th, we had a rally at Anshe Emet. You were nice enough to make a video for us. And in the video, you made the point that unless the places destroyed by Hamas on the southern envelope are rebuilt and people move back again after the destruction of October 7th, then what took place on that day will always be remembered as a victory for Hamas. Do you stand by that?
Oh, absolutely. Hamas did what it did on October 7 with one purpose, which is to create a precedent that Palestinian terrorism can push Israel deeply and backwards into its own borders, because these were not attacks on disputed settlements or occupied territories. They breached the border. They entered communities within the internationally recognized borders of the State of Israel. They successfully emptied them de facto. Okay, they murdered and they kidnapped and they did some other horrendous things, and now all of these communities are empty and have become military zones. Now our military went into Gaza, struck back. Now there are approximately 2 million refugees in Gaza. The entire northern portion of the Gaza Strip has moved south, controlled by the IDF. If we don't go back into these communities, they will have their victory picture. They will say, listen, we struck them, we surprised them, we pushed them back, we pushed them away from the border, and the next time we'll do it in Tel Aviv. This will be the method. And maybe next time it will not come from Gaza, maybe it will come from Jordan, maybe it will come from Lebanon, I don't know. But the method will have been proven successful. We cannot allow that. We need these communities to emerge from this trauma stronger than they were on October 6th. Now, that is a very high bar, because each of these border communities lived through an unthinkable trauma. Just in my kibbutz, again, out of approximately 450, we lost 15 people. Each one of them is a friend, a neighbor. My own, if I look at my own neighborhood, and the house in front of me, Ilan Fiorentino, the security coordinator of our community, a father of 3 young girls, went out to fight and was killed by the terrorists. And 2 houses behind me, Shoshi Brosh, a 75-year-old woman, was murdered in her house. I used to see her every morning when I took my girls to daycare. And she would smile, and they would say good morning to her and say something, about what they're going to do in their daycare today. And when we come back and we walk in the morning, she's not going to be there anymore. So if this is a very, very big challenge to rebuild strength in these communities and bring them to a better place than they were before, so that 2 years from now and 5 years from now, when people in Gaza look across the border, they will see the biggest failure in the history of Hamas. They will see communities that are thriving and prospering despite of what Hamas did to them on October 7th. Any other result is a victory for Hamas, and the entire region will see it. And that's why I said, when I sent you that video, that rebuilding these communities is the most important Zionist challenge of the 21st century. And I definitely stand by that.
So if we were to go to Nahal Oz today, we were to go down there, what would what would it look like to us? Would we see buildings destroyed? What would we see?
You would see, first of all, a place that's been deserted since October 7th. There are military reservists in the kibbutz, but and very, very few residents who have come back, mostly people who work in agriculture, work in the cow shed, and have to be there several days a week to take care of that business. You would hear a lot of explosions because there are artillery forces spread around the kibbutz in the fields. You would see tanks in the fields. You would see a lot of damage caused actually by the military. All of the agricultural equipment and the water's irrigating systems were all destroyed by the tanks. That's how it is. There's not, I mean, we're not complaining about it, but you would see homes, some of them were torched. Some of them, like my home, were only struck by 30 something bullets and a hand grenade. And so you would see windows that were shattered and doors that were broken into and walls that are full of bullet holes, and it's large bullet holes. It's AK-47.
Yeah.
You would see cars that were torched. And at the same time, you would see a beautiful place. You would see
Mm.
beautiful green lawns that are still being maintained by our gardening team, even though one of them, Omri, is kidnapped in Gaza. You know, these guys are coming every week to the kibbutz to work and to beautify the place while their friend is, God knows, you know, what's happening to him, but is in the hands of the enemy on the other side of the border. You would see the beginning of the reparation works, the very early beginning of repairing some of the buildings, some of the homes that were damaged. And I think you would see the tragedy and you would see the hope. You would see the cow shed working again and the cows being milked. And you would see in some of the fields the tractors working, you know, the ones that were not stolen by Hamas. Uh, you would see a lot of pain, a lot of pain, but you would also see a lot of hope.
We've talked about this, and I'm so moved by the way you framed this as being the Zionist project, you know, of this moment.
Yes.
And I know that people in our community would love to be able to support this effort. Is there a
Yes.
way for us to do that? How would we be able to support um, the rebuilding of your kibbutz?
So thank you for asking that, Rabbi. I'm going to send in the chat to everyone a link to the website through which Nahal Oz is collecting donations, fundraising. Now, I have to say something about this issue. We are fundraising directly for the kibbutz, and there is a US tax exempt option for donations at this link. And we're doing it because we don't want any middlemen. We don't want the money going to salaries or offices or office buildings or advertising or anything like that, which sometimes happens when you donate to larger organizations. We are taking this directly to the kibbutz bank account, and there is a committee within the kibbutz that I'm involved in that sets the priorities for the rebuilding and the rehabilitation of the kibbutz. Okay, education. We want to build a newer, more secure kindergarten for our children. Agriculture. We want to improve some of the equipment that was stolen or damaged. Healthcare. We want to offer better health services in the community to make it more appealing for families to come and join. Families that maybe now are considering, oh, we should come and strengthen this community at a time of need. But, you know, what are we going to get, you know, in terms of health services? This is a peripheral area. We are setting priorities. We're deciding what to do with this. We're coordinating as much as we can with government agencies, but it's not going to anyone's salary or office space or anything like that. It's a direct donation to an impacted community. And this is a great way to help. And, you know, because we have this long-standing relationship, I will also be able to update you over time what's being done and what's happening in the kibbutz. And so anybody
Well,
who wants to help, I sent the link now. And again, there's a US tax exempt option. This is the best way right now to support our efforts.
this gives us an opportunity to really have a hands-on support. And something that I think would be very important on a personal level with our community. I know that our family will be making a contribution, and I know that others will be joining as well, Amir.
Thank you.
I think it's
And I
important
can
for
also,
us.
and if I can ask Rabbi, if you make a donation, write that you were on this webinar, because we're also trying to learn what is more effective for us
Sure.
in raising them. We have a team that is in charge of that, of how to improve. So if you write, that you were on this webinar, we're trying to examine right now what works better, what doesn't work as well. So that also gives us an indication, and thank you for that.
I think it's important to note in closing that this that your framing of the Zionist idea here is really very important, because Hamas attacked Israel at a place that was part of the original Israel, part of the decision of the United Nations. We're not talking about any disputed area here in Israel.
Absolutely.
This is a recognized part of Israel, and the fact that they attacked this place was a statement that says there's not an inch of the state of Israel where Jews will be allowed to live if Hamas has its way. And so this is a fight for the Zionist idea. This is a fight for the state of Israel. This is a way for us to be supporting that idea. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think this is a very important point that you're making here. This is a very important point. This is, and again, when Hamas did this, I think this was exactly their goal. The idea was to try to push us back, and we want to push forward.
So speaking of
and
pushing
not
forward,
with a goal from my point of view, and the vast majority of the people in my community, not with a goal of taking over their territory, not with a goal of now occupying Gaza or anything like that. No, but simply to go back to our homes and to send a message that we're here to stay, and hopefully to reach a place in the future where that message is internalized and understood on the other side of the border. And then we can also talk about making peace when that message is internalized and understood.
so we always end a service with singing Oseh Shalom. So let's look to the future. And this is my last question, with the great thanks to you for making time to speak with us, and also our appreciation of our friendship. Are you at all hopeful that the Saudi and the Saudi plan will be implemented? Because at the heart of that is some
Yeah,
sort of Palestinian entity.
not with this current government. If we have a different constellation politically in Israel, it can definitely be achieved. I don't see it happening with the Ben Gvir Smotrich government, which is sad, because it would be a tremendous blow to Hamas. I mean, this would be, apart from what I said about, the Palestinians in Gaza seeing Nahal Oz prospering 2 and 3 years from now, seeing Israel and Saudi Arabia reach an agreement would also be a complete failure of what they tried to do on October 7. And sadly, I'm not sure that with the current makeup of the government, it's possible.
Right, and
Maybe
let's
that will
also,
also change.
God willing, because we haven't mentioned the word Iran once
No.
in the past hour, but this is all part of the Iranian master plan. And the fact that this attack today that took the lives of American service people, was really directed by Iran. Anything that comes out of Iraq is really being directed by Iran. And so if we want to take on Iran, this is that making peace with Saudi Arabia, or having some sort of arrangement, and with the Sunni universe, seems to me to be our best option. I'll give you the last
Amen.
word.
Amen. Amen. I agree. And again, it would be a tremendous victory over what Hamas tried to achieve. and Hezbollah and Iran with them. So definitely I share that idea.
Amir, we thank you for making the time for us. We thank you for your friendship. But I want to say that, the decision that you and your wife made to relocate and to move to Gaza, and the reasons that you did that remain an inspiration to us. We look forward to your book and, God willing, a book tour when you will come and visit us. And we look forward to many other opportunities to learn from you. I wish you and your family peace and safety, and your parents as well. And our prayer for the whole state of Israel is that we're going to come to a more peaceful day soon, and the hostages will come home. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to everyone who listened. Thank you to the two people, our team just texted me, that have already gone into our website and supported us. And really, thank you, everyone, for the friendship and the cooperation over the years with Anshe Emet. Toda rabba.
Shalom, shalom.
Bye-bye.